Hello, this is Peter Campbell. I am introducing you to a indicator called M3 Pivots. Basically, this is a very advanced pivots tool. Calculates all the pivot points that at least I know about, and has a bunch of other advantages that allow you to calculate a bunch of pivot points I never knew about before. So basically, we've loaded the daily pivot onto the ES. It's labeled PP, and there's a couple interesting things I'd like to point out about this chart. It looks simple, but there's an important element here, which is that the pivot for tomorrow is calculated. And what is consistently a pattern is that the predicted pivot is a magnet for price. So if we sell down, we would bounce, at least after hours, and towards this pivot. If we were to sell down to here, we'd bounce to there. There's a magnet towards the next day's pivot. And this calculation is run and it changes color as it becomes more sure of what the next day's pivot will be. And it gives you a good idea where the market magnets are going to go. Now, let's go look at the indicator. There's a couple interesting things about the way this is set up. One is that you get to specify the period of the pivot in any increment that you want. You can do daily, hourly, weekly, monthly, and you can choose the number of periods. So you could do a 2-day pivot, 3-day pivot, 4-day, 5-day, 6-day. Or you can do a 2-week pivot by typing in or in copying, for example. You can just go in and copy this. That would give you a 2-week pivot. This will give you 1 week. This will give you a 21-week. You could do even a 52-week pivot, and then we'll give you pivots for a year, basically. Let's go back to daily and take a look at the pivot combinations. Basically, over here you can see that we have the ability to calculate a bunch of different types of pivots. Classic is the default floor pivots. Then you have fib pivots, iterative fib, recursive fib pivots. These are very powerful. The fibs are not particularly modifiable, but they are a good starting point. Iterative fib and recursive fibs are very interesting because they give you the ability to set your fib ratios. This is for the fib extensions for S1, S2, S3, and R1, R2, R3, etc. Then there's the Woody pivots, which gives you the Woody pivot point and the Woody extensions, which are totally different equations than floor pivots. There's Camarilla, and then a modified pivot. So let's just take a look at how to get the extensions on. Firstly, the pivot inputs are interesting to see because then you get to see, especially for predictive pivot, what inputs it's looking at in order to generate the price for the next day. Rounding to tick is also extremely useful because pivots can be coming into some sort of calculations that don't resolve to a particular tick, and it's appropriate that they should be actually moved to the closest tick. Showing labels gives you the ability to hide or show a label for each pivot. And a label prefix gives you the ability to add a prefix to it. So, for example, if you were going to have a daily pivot, you could label it D, or you could label it a small d, or if you had a weekly, you could label it a week, like weekly with a small w. You can plot midpoints on the pivots, which is also very useful. And, of course, this is the projection for the next pivot. And then you have the ability to turn on and off any of the pivot extensions. So let's show a couple here. Okay, so we have now all of our pivots here, and they're all labeled, and by mistake I actually labeled them with a W here, and when really it's a daily pivot. So here are our pivots. Let's go and plot the midpoints. So at this point we have, very subtle lines here showing the midpoint pivots. And you can change the colors on all of these things for the indicator. Let's turn those off since we don't really need them right now. And let's take a look at the different types of pivots. So let's go to the floor, if we have the floor pivots here, the classic pivots, let's go to the fib. Okay, so here's our Fibonacci pivots. You can see that they do a pretty good job of outlining key support and resistance. This is just the standard Fibonacci pivots. My favorite, personally, is the recursive fib. The recursive fib and the iterative fibs. So let's run these, and I'm going to take this D off there. First, let's do the iterative fib here. So that's our iterative fib. That also does a very good job of giving us some key levels. It's not my favorite, but it's good. Let's do the recursive fib. So we put this in there so you can paste it, just like what I'm doing here. The TradeStation doesn't give you the ability to have drop-down menus, which would be nice, but it doesn't. Let's go take a look at this. Okay, so there's your recursive fibs, and these give you, in my opinion, some of the best general targets, but you might want to know exactly where everybody else's traditional fibs are, and that's why I give you the ability to, or we give you the ability to run as many calculations as you want. And additionally to that, you have the ability to modify how you calculate the fib basis. So you could do it at a Fibonacci 0.5, which changes the ratios for the fibs. You can do it at a 0.786. As you can see, this is moving all your fibs around, and it's actually a very powerful tool for being able to find good quality S1, R1 type relationships. I tend to like to keep things simple, so I actually don't even run the excuse me, the longer projections. I like to keep it pretty straightforward, pretty simple. And let's go back to our 2 here. So there we go. That's the fibs with recursive, and then we have the Woody fibs. And I don't know if you don't know about who Woody is, you should check it out. Woody's CCI. He's kind of a rock star, legend type person in the trading world. I think he likes to not even watch price and only watch CCI. I have not a lot of experience with him, but these are his projections and his his pivot points. And then there's the Camarilla and Modified. Very powerful tool.